The Stranger Things series is all the hype nowadays, as it lives on the genre that was triggered back in the 80s with films like Ghostbusters, The Goonies, and last but not least, The Lost Boys. But fans of The Lost Boys might be interested to know that there have been various attempts at making a franchise out of it with various new characters and a particular fan favorite making a comeback. Even though you might know that the sequels exist, there was also a graphic novel that connected the sequels to the original movie. Let's give the Lost Boys franchise a spin and look at the crazy adventures of the Frog Brothers. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. California Screamin'. Dive into the world of the Lost Boys. These Lost Boys aren't Peter Pan's friends, but their aging concept might be similar. As just like Peter's friends, these vampires don't seem to be getting any older. The underrated director, much ridiculed for the batsuit with nipples from Batman and Robin, introduced us to this world of vampires and teenagers. Even though Schumacher gets a lot of hate from fans of The Dark Knight, some movies clearly show his unique vision, and The Lost Boys is significant proof of that. Based in the fictional town of Santa Clara, California, brothers Michael Emerson and Sam move in to discover a lot more than they had expected in this town. As their mother Lucy gets a job in the video store, the two try to vibe with people from their own age group in the town. Michael meets Star and gets instantly attracted to her, only to find that she is probably already in a relationship with David, the leader of a bike gang. Meanwhile, Sam visits the local comic book store to meet Edgar and Alan Frog, who introduce him to horror comics that indicate supernatural threats that roam around the town. Yes, Schumacher knew that bringing comic book stores would ideally hook a particular age group of the audience, and it worked. And yes, the names Edgar and Alan reference the other horror genre legend Edgar Allan Poe. While Sam's new circle may be the safe option for friends, Michael seems to have gone into trouble with his new group of people. As Michael tries to win Star's heart, David and his motorcycle gang put him in various tests to become a member. Finally, during one of their hangouts, they offer him a bottle which, according to Star, has blood in it, but Michael complies and drinks it up. Yes, this leads to the early developments inside him, which, for the audience, clearly indicates that he is undoubtedly transforming into something inhumane. Still, Michael hasn't caught on to that yet. Over time, he grows sensitive to sunlight and even finds food revolting. The weirdest transformation is when Sam discovers that Michael's reflection in the mirror is translucent, and Sam instantly connects the dots to him being a vampire. It is good that he did, considering Michael was almost about to attack him, but their dog, Nanook, came to the rescue. Michael tries to convince Sam that he has not completely transformed into a vampire, and he might need his help before things go bloody. Sam accepts this theory, since Michael hasn't killed yet, and his transformation hasn't happened completely. As Sam and the Frog Brothers try to investigate the case, they deduce that Max, the owner of the video store where Lucy works, might be the head of the vampires. Killing the head would be a solution to prevent Michael from undergoing a complete transformation. However, their suspicions go wrong when they find that Max has a reflection during his visit for dinner with Lucy, which means he couldn't possibly be a vampire, right? Meanwhile, David, played by 24's Kiefer Sutherland, tries to complete Michael's conversion by making him kill, which he continues to refuse. Later we find out that Michael was one of the gang's targets for Star to kill because she and Laddie were still undergoing their conversion to full-time vampires. Killing Michael would have completed her transformation, but things were beyond that. Michael realizes that he has to do something to save these two while saving himself. He brings Sam and the Frog Brothers to their lair while asleep during the day. They manage to impale one of these vampires with a stake, but this wakes up the others, and the boys escape along with Star and Laddie. But they know the vampires will come for them at night, so they prepare with all the usual anti-vampire weapons, such as holy water and stakes. Finally, the vampires come to attack, and it soon goes into a scary battle with them fighting off each kid. Ultimately, Michael and David face off against each other, and this time around, antlers are added to the list of the various weapons to kill the vampires. David gets impaled by the antler during their fight, but this doesn't change Michael. The kids realize that they haven't killed the head vampire yet, and the danger isn't over. Somewhere else, Lucy and Max return from a date, but then we get the complete twist, since the kids weren't right about Max, and he confesses to being the head vampire. He explains that his reflection has been visible previously because he had been invited to the house. Max goes on to explain that converting Lucy into a vampire was a part of his plan so that Max could ease her into becoming a vampire and the Lost Boys would finally have a mother figure. With this, he approaches her and is only about to transform her when Emerson's grandpa drives into the wall of the house. He manages to impale Max with one of the wooden fence posts, and this kills him right there as he explodes. This death brings Michael Starr and Laddie back to their usual human selves. As the kids go to check in on Grandpa, he states the iconic dialogue about vampires in Santa Clara, something that will play a significant role in the sequels in the franchise. It is an iconic ending to a plot riddled with plot holes and needs some explanations to be filled in. But this doesn't mark the tale's end for our heroic kids, as they will return soon in future movies, even though Emerson didn't make a significant return. But before we jump into these movies, let's look at what happened right after the movie, considering there are questions that need to be answered. How did Grandpa know about the vampires? Why did he jump into action during that event if he knew about the vampires in Santa Clara? Will the Frog Brothers become a big deal after their vampire hunting adventure? What happened after the movie? Following the movie, many sequels were planned, and Joel Schumacher had his plans regarding this, but eventually, he had to take a back seat. His original plan for a sequel titled The Lost Girls was left out, and a new feature titled The Tribe was developed without Schumacher being involved. Schumacher did not like this idea and didn't even want the movie to be made. However, the film was eventually released as a graphic novel series from May to August 2008, filling in the details in the middle for the fans. But the most fun was that the graphic novel took the tone of being a visual treat, even though most of the story turned out to be less than authentic at times. Well, you'll find out eventually. Lost Boys, Reign of Frogs begins in Luna Bay, California in 2007, when a young kid visits the residence of what seems like a vampire hunter with crosses hanging all around. He finds someone working on a surfboard inside and asks for Eddie. The person responds, "It's Edgar Frog." The boy agrees and is about to step in when Edgar stops him and asks him to stay in the sun since he hasn't been invited into the room yet. But then the boy says he wants to become his apprentice, and Edgar smiles and tests whether he is a vampire by asking him to touch a cross and spilling some holy water on him. With no indication of being a vampire, Edgar invites him into the house and tells him that he doesn't want apprentices and that the kid could go to far better teachers to shape surfing boards. But it seems this kid already knows Edgar more than he expects, as he clarifies that he wants to hunt vampires. The kid turns out to be pretty clever with his words, since when Edgar is just about to start his skit about what he means by vampires, the kid again clarifies all the signs that indicate that he is a vampire hunter based on the setting of the place he was living in. Even though Edgar tries to warn him, the kid remains persistent about being a vampire hunter, and when Edgar denies the offer again, the kid tells him that he would have to go to Alan Frog in that case. This statement triggers Edgar, and he asks the kid to sit back as he starts telling him about the Frog Brothers' adventures after the events of the Lost Boys movie. The one we find out about is a senator who turns out to be a vampire, and the Frog Boys have to kill him and his entire group of vampires. Later, we find that it was a mission sanctioned by the President of the United States himself, and the brothers presented him with the head of the senator. When the kid is in disbelief, Edgar lets him in on the law by telling him about the worldwide history of vampires and how the British were primarily vampires. Some historical references include Abraham Lincoln and Benjamin Franklin, who are part of the Van Helsing Society, one of the oldest brotherhoods of vampire hunters. A cheeky little reference to Abraham Lincoln, vampire hunter. It's about time we got a sequel of that story, and maybe the Frog Brothers can help with that. To prove his story, Edgar shows him the Van Helsing Medal of Valor that was given to them by the Society, and that finally settles the kid's belief regarding the Frog Brothers' adventures. The Frog Brothers' lore only gets better when the duo is cornered by a vampire on their way back from Washington, D.C., and they use the Washington Monument replica they brought for their mother to kill a vampire. Yes, this is as cool as we could have expected them to be, but everything isn't okay back home since David, yes, David, has been waiting for them. The duo returns home, and they're followed by David and his friends, and he also explains how he managed to survive their last encounter. According to him, him, the antler didn't get him in the heart, and that's how he managed to survive. But more on that is discovered later. As they continue with their attack on the brothers, David mentions that he is particularly looking for Star, and right then, Sam Emerson enters and kills one of the vampires. Together, the trio manages to kill most of the vampires, and then Nook does his part by stopping a few. As David walks away, he mentions that his part isn't over yet, and he will get what he wants. The kids go to Grandpa's place and try to break down whatever happened so far, only to come to terms with the fact that Max isn't the only leading vampire. As they try to figure out who else could be a vampire, they go to the fridge, opening a new can of worms. It seems that Grandpa is a vampire himself. Considering he was the one who knew about the vampires, he managed to kill Max by impaling him with a wooden stake on his car, and last but not least of the clues, he has bottles of blood packed in his fridge. As they come to terms with this discovery, Grandpa enters in his car, and the kids ask him what happened. Then Grandpa reveals he is one of them, but there's more to that than meets the eye. Remember all those antlers we saw in his cabin when the fight between David and Michael happened? Those, and a few other bones, were in that place because Grandpa was already a half vampire. To prevent complete conversion, he needed to only feed on animal blood. When the kids asked him who made him one of them, he reveals that it was the Black Widow of Santa Clara. Remember the widow whom Grandpa was delivering a taxidermy dog? This revelation also explains how David survived following Max's death, because he too had been turned by the Black Widow. Then we witness David going to the Black Widow, who tells him that Michael and Star will return after Sam and the Frog Brothers are killed by her and her gang. Meanwhile, Grandpa takes the boys to her lair, where we discover that he is very well connected, as they let him right in, and he manages to get them inside through a window. But then he takes them to the dungeon, which, TMI warning, is quite famous for sadism, bondage, masochism, and other isms the kids did not need to know. But as they reach there, they are attacked by a massive group of female vampires, and they have to retaliate as well. During their fight, one of the vampires grabs hold of Alan and makes him drink her blood, which converts him into one of them. As Alan almost gives up, Edgar explains that if they kill their leader, Alan will be saved, but before they can continue, a giant vampire attacks them with his sickle. It manages to kill Grandpa and goes for the rest of them until Sam pulls out his gun and fires stakes into it. Turning back, he finds Edgar alone, sobbing in the corner. Edgar said this was the last time he saw Alan, and nobody knew what had happened to him. When the kids ask what happened to him, he states that Alan is lost in the shadows. After finishing his story, he decides to drop the kids at home. Edgar hands him a cross, telling him it could save his life. But all this time, someone else was listening in the shadows and jumping to attack Edgar. As she attacks him, she reveals that he is wanted alive by David and manages to put him down quickly until the kid attacks her with a cross and kills her. Now the fans of the brothers duo should prepare themselves for some vast revelations as the kid confronts Edgar and Edgar comes clean. According to him, the vampire senator thing never really happened, and there might not even be a Van Helsing society, since the medal was something he bought from a Hot Topic Halloween sale. Finally, when asked how they managed to kill many vampires, Edgar revealed that most were sleeping in their coffins. So it seems most of the story in this 4th issue storyline was a lie, and yet when Edgar asks the kid if he wants to join the Frog Army, he agrees without a second thought. The final event in the comic book takes us back to 1987, depicting the scene from the movie where David and his gang fed on some of the people at a bonfire party. One of the people amongst them was Shane Powers, who managed to survive the attack and got converted to a vampire himself. As he went to the sea to quench his thirst, he realized he didn't want water, and his bleeding invited a shark towards him. Thirsty for blood, Shane fed on the shark as more and more sharks surrounded him, and he kept feeding himself. He dedicates his new life to making a tribe since he has lost everyone around him. Another essential detail he mentions is that David is his half-brother, which might mean David was motivated to convert Shane into a vampire. There are a lot of connections to keep in mind, but don't worry, all of these elements will be explored in the other 2 movies in the franchise. The Lost Boys returned to bite in the tribe. Even though Joel Schumacher had different plans for a sequel, we got a sequel in the 1987 movie Lost Boys: The Tribe in 2008. This movie had a lot of explaining, which it tried to do, but it ended up being a mix of a solo venture and a sequel, with Edgar taking on the command of the franchise. This role is something that Corey Feldman had to get used to because the others didn't seem to be interested in a solid return to the franchise. The sequel introduces us to Chris Emerson, Sam's cousin, who moves into Luna Bay, California with his younger sister Nicole. He was probably told about Edgar and his cousin, since he leaves his address at the latter's residence, who seems to be continuing with his surfboard shaping job that we saw in the comic books. Remember Shane Powers from the ending of The Reign of Frogs? He comes across Chris and invites him to a party that night. Chris and Nicole go to the party and both get separated as Shane tries to get involved with two of his people to convert them. Yes, it all sounds very similar to the plot of The Lost Boys, and this time around, Nicole gets converted when she gets tricked by Shane to drink his blood. Later, when they get back home, Nicole slowly starts her conversion process and targets Chris as her first victim, but Edgar pops up and knocks her out. He explains everything to Chris, who rejects this theory and kicks him out of the house. Yes, the movie does land its jokes when the chances come, but Chris gets convinced later when Lisa, trying to seduce him at the party, shows up at their place and tries to feed on him. Chris comes to his senses and mistakenly impales her on, guess what? A rack of antlers that makes her explode. That's enough information to confirm Edgar's theories, so Chris asks Edgar for help, who tells him about the entire half-vampire concept and then lays out a plan. But Shane draws Nicole to his lair, and he goes to have with her. Yes, there's no more kid stuff in this franchise. Chris and Edgar plan to kill Shane and his gang, but Chris must become one of them to infiltrate them. Later, they kill the vampires one by one, and there's a cool scene where Edgar kills one of the vampires, Kyle, using a holy water balloon. Finally, they face off against the gang leader, Shane, who is too busy trying to convince Nicole to kill one of their victims, but she denies it and impales him with a stake. Shane isn't done yet and tries to pull her towards the stake, and right then, Chris chops his head off with a sword, and the siblings return to being humans. Now that the main plot is over, some exciting scenes come around the movie's end that try to explain the events of the comic book. The original ending for the films features Sam Emerson, who seems to have become a vampire, coming to talk to Edgar, and right before the credits resume, they are seen charging at each other. However, the film had two different post-credit scene planners, each hitting a distinct possibility for the third entry in the franchise. The first one had Sam come to Edgar, telling him that Alan was coming to settle the score. He tells him that he needs a lot of weapons to prepare them for Alan's attack, but Edgar seems reluctant to accept Sam's help in fighting his brother. Right then, we see Alan, who is now a vampire, driving wildly through the streets with a woman, excited to confront Edgar. However, the second one has one more detail attached. It's an extension of the previous ending, and this time, Sam shows him that he has a bite mark on his neck. A lot to process indeed. Well, luckily, we have another franchise entry for more of these adventures. How does the story end? Lost Boys: The Thirst marks the franchise end. The story begins in Washington, D.C., as the Frog Brothers go on a mission to prevent a congressman's vampire party. But things go wrong as Alan is fed by one of the vampires and turns into one of them. Before Edgar can chat with him, he manages to sneak away. Well, there goes the version of the story from the comic book, but it all turns out to be a dream. This story only keeps getting confusing and doesn't seem to stop doing that anytime soon. Edgar wakes up to get a notice of eviction from his place and meets Zoe, an old friend of his. They both meet the famous blogger Johnny Trash, a very creative name indeed, and Zoe explains that Trash is there for a rave in town. This gathering is not the end of the context-setting part of the movie, as Edgar heads back to his place to meet Gwen Lieber, who tells him that her brother has been kidnapped in a rave in Ibiza, Spain. She tells him about this drug called Thirst, which seems to be turning people into vampires, and the raves are hosted by none other than DJ X. You're not supposed to know DJ X, but I just felt like saying it that way made it more fun. The rest of the movie deals with Edgar going on a mission, which he denied in the beginning, and fans of the franchise get to enjoy reference to Sam when Edgar visits his grave to give him the Batman issue 14. This is after Edgar was forced to kill Sam because he turned into a vampire. Later, Edgar goes to visit Alan, who is now a vampire, and he rejects Edgar's offer to join him in stopping DJ X. Now that we are done with the franchise verse, we find multiple storylines as we get into the action where we see one twist after another which does not make sense. Okay, let's give it a shot. Gwen Lieber hired Edgar to get her brother Peter, who was kidnapped by DJ X, who hosts the raves, when he hands out the thirst vials. But now, when they jump into action, it seems that Gwen is in on the entire thing, and it is Peter who is the alpha vampire and wants Edgar to work for him, so that he can get the vampires killed. Yes, Gwen and Peter are a couple. simple. I hope you got all that. Now we see some action when Alan joins Edgar but gets controlled by Peter. But all this ends with Edgar killing Peter with holy water and everyone else returning to normal. But it seems that the franchise wasn't done with the entire story yet. Even though everything was back to normal with the Frog Brothers, Zoe, the girl from the beginning, turned out to be a werewolf right before the movie ended. As indicated in the previous entry, Sam would have had a more significant role in the movie, but he couldn't participate because of his busy schedule. He stated that he would be in the fourth film, which didn't happen, and we lost Corey Haim in 2010. Marvelous verdict. The Lost Boys franchise shifted from the plot being about kids to the story carried by the Frogs brothers, particularly Edgar, played by Corey Feldman. However, no one can deny that the original entry to the franchise planted the seed for many vampire movies that had a different approach to the genre. Do we mean that Twilight wouldn't have happened if there were no Lost Boys? Maybe, maybe not. But yes, with the wide variety of reboots happening, perhaps we will eventually see Schumacher's idea for a Lost Girls movie that never really came to fruition. Let's just hope Corey Feldman only gets a cameo this time and allows other characters to get their time in the film. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.